Welcome to Fox Soul's Black Report, your space for Black news, views, and opinions. Today is February 1st. It's a Tuesday, the kickoff of Black History Month. I'm Seth Lemon.
I'm Nielle.
I'm Romeo.
I'm Demi Lobo. And on today's report, more bomb threats targeting HBCUs around the nation. Now the federal government, they're getting involved. Meanwhile, Bridgeport, Connecticut's top cop suspends detectives looking into the deaths of 2 Black women. And good news for parents who want to get their kids under 5 vaccinated. Shots could be ready by the end of the month.
Plus, it's the Year of the Tiger. We'll tell you what you need to know about the Chinese Lunar New Year, which kicks off today. And if you got the cash, you can get a seat at the Super Bowl, but that's only if you're not scared by the price.
Uh-oh, we have that and so much more, and you know how we do it, from our voice and our truth. So if you're ready, let's go.
For the second day in a row, HBCUs around the nation have been the target of bomb threats. And now the FBI is joining this investigation. This morning, threats were directed to 13 historically Black colleges and universities. Most of the schools, they went on campus lockdown while law enforcement worked to clear any threats. No bombs were found at any of the schools. Florida police say the threat at Bethune-Cookman is linked to a neo-Nazi group that's claiming responsibility for the threats. Late last night, Howard students were forced to shelter in place because of a threat. Now, meanwhile, the FBI and the ATF are coordinating with local police departments on these cases. The latest incident comes after yesterday's threats at 6 HBCUs around the country. And just a few weeks ago, at the beginning of January, we saw more than a handful of HBCUs that were also targeted with this same similar attack. We talked about how this is reminiscent of the 1950s and 60s with bomb threats that were used against Black people. This scare tactic that it seems is not letting up at all.
Absolutely.
On the first day of Black History, that is just atrocious. And let's talk about the facts. The FBI has already said that white domestic terrorists are on the rise. We did a story last week about domestic terrorists attacking our power grids, and the FBI has said it. So this is a huge problem. And white domestic terrorists, they have been a problem in this nation dating back to slavery, and we really need to address it. It's atrocious that what they're doing to our HBCUs.
I agree with that. We're talking about, what, 2 days in a row, 3 times within a month, but we cannot take this situation lightly. I know this is time-consuming. It costs the city money to go ahead and double-check on these things, but we have to have all precautions, and we have to have flags up for this one. Right?
Yeah, I just couldn't imagine having to go to class after this. Honestly, it's a certain feeling of invasion when you hear about this, a space that you want to go to feel safe, to feel loved, to feel comforted, to be around people that look and feel like you, and also further your education. I just couldn't imagine on campus or off campus feeling comfortable and safe enough to even go back to school after all of this is cleared up.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep you posted on this for sure. Now, there are new reports detailing former President Trump's attempts to throw out the results of the 2020 election. CNN says Trump advisors drafted 2 versions of an executive order to seize voting machines. One was sent to the Department of Defense, the other, the Department of Homeland Security. Neither order was formalized. CNN says the sources tell them former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and others were behind the plan. An action like that has never happened in U.S. history. Meanwhile, we're also learning today some Trump White House documents handed over to the House Select Committee investigation last year's riot had been ripped up. The National Archives staff had to tape the papers back together. The agency says the records were torn up by former President Donald Trump. Trump sued to keep the documents secret, citing executive privilege. This is information that's been out there that we need to go ahead and make sure we follow up on. We're talking hundreds of pages, documents that he has torn up and ripped up. What is he hiding? From the moment he took office and building the wall to all the things he's done, the years he was in office, to what he's still doing now. Look, it's time that we go ahead and nail this guy. He has to go behind bars.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the headlines to take over that Republicans created the biggest fraud when it comes to elections in this country. We did the story last week. 19 Republican in leadership, they created voter fraud. You know, they were going to vote and they didn't have the right to be electors. And I don't see news cycles really picking up this story like the way they pick up Republicans saying that voter fraud is being created by people of color. This is atrocious, and somebody needs to continue to go after Donald Trump.
The mother of Tamir Rice, the boy who killed a Cleveland cop in 2015, is angry with the Justice Department. The DOJ will not reopen a federal civil rights case against former cop Timothy Loman. Loman, who was fired from the force, shot and killed 12-year-old Tamir, who was playing with a toy gun in a park. Samaria Rice says it's disgusting. No one is indicted in her son's death. Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark says the high standards that are set by the Supreme Court in a case like this one made it difficult to try Loman on civil rights charges. In 2015, a Cleveland grand jury refused to indict the former officer on criminal charges. I think that it's also disgusting to hear about this story. And so I always find it interesting what cases the DOJ wants to look into, what cases they want to drop, which cases they want to reopen again that have already been closed. And it really just seems like it's all over the place right now. So many of our black women and men have been disrespected by the DOJ. And it's just really sickening that a black mother has to yet again feel like the system does not support her.
Yeah, the Kristen Clark, who you mentioned, she's the head of the Civil Rights Division over at DOJ. And this is the same division that was responsible for making those plea agreement deals with the family, the McMichaels, that plea agreement that was rejected yesterday by a federal judge in the Ahmaud Arbery case. This is the same department. So it's interesting to see what CRT, that's the initials there, what they're focused on. And she said that this should not be viewed as an exoneration, but clearly, I don't know if they're going after wins, trying to win legal arguments in cases, or if they're actually trying to find justice.
Yeah, we cannot chop this up as a rookie mistake because he was a rookie at the time. All right, the Connecticut detectives who led the investigations into the deaths of two African-American women have been suspended. Bridgeport Mayor Joseph Gannon says he's disappointed with how the two officers dealt with the deaths of Lauren Smith Fields and Brenda Rawls. Neither family of the dead women were contacted immediately after police discovered the bodies. Fields is a 23-year-old black woman who was found dead the morning after a date with the man she met on a dating app. The 53-year-old Rawls case was strangely similar. Family members say Rawls was planning to meet a man in her neighborhood. She was found unresponsive in that man's house. The cause of Rawls' death has not been determined, but a medical examiner says Fields died of a drug overdose. Bridgeport police say they've opened an investigation into the Fields' death. Something is not right with this situation, from the officer that's handling it to the man that oversees those officers, who has now, I think, stepped down and moved away from the situation. That lets you know that there's a problem within this police department, and we have to dig deep and make sure we solve these two.
I say power to the people, because if the people wouldn't have brought attention to this case and spoke up, I don't think that it would have gotten the attention that it did and the response that it received. So I just continue to tell our soulmates, when you see something, say something and speak up.
Yeah.
An Atlanta prosecutor is asking for the FBI's help to protect court officials in Georgia. This after former President Trump told supporters this weekend to hold massive protests against Fani Willis and other lawyers investigating the former president. DA Willis has a criminal investigation into whether Trump tried to interfere in Georgia's 2020 presidential election. Major probes into Trump's finances, as well as interference with the certification of the election, are being led by African Americans. Many are worried Trump's call for a massive protest could end up like the January 6th attacks on the U.S. Capitals. And we know this. We saw what he said over the weekend, and then look what happened to black colleges. There's something about Donald Trump when he says things, he stirs up his base, he empowers them. I know we can't, really say that it's actually his fault, but there is a cause and effect when Donald Trump speaks to his base.
I agree. And unfortunately, there are some simple-minded people, as my mom would say out there, that's going to buy into this. So you don't want the people of color not going to get in line to vote in fear of their lives. You don't want that. You want to make sure they go out and vote strong. And they're trying to discourage them. That's all they're trying to do. So definitely, they got to bring out help and support for that.
All right, staying on the politics beat here, Joe Manchin says that he wants the Senate to move quickly in confirming a replacement for Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer. The West Virginia senator's comments come days after President Biden said he wants to pick a nominee by the end of the month. Manchin also says he supports Biden's decision to nominate a black woman to the high court. The senator says a black woman on the court would, quote, be a balance that needs to be done to represent who we are as a nation.
While the promise by President Trump to pick a black woman to sit on the court is popular with Democrats, that can't be said of people on the right. Many Republicans say picking a black woman is an act of affirmative action. But our next guest, Malik Abdul, he disagrees. He's a political analyst and GOP strategist that doesn't have a problem with what President Biden wants to do with his nominee. Malik joins us from Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Now, you wrote an opinion piece in 2020 for the Washington Examiner, and it was around the time of Amy Coney Barrett's nomination to the Supreme Court. And you called for a black woman to be nominated at that time. Talk to us about why it was so important for you to write that piece.
Well, as a conservative, this is not really something that we talk about enough, because when we, diversity, things like that, it ends up getting a bad rap. But I was very familiar with a particular jurist who was Judge Allison K. Duncan, who was the first African-American woman to sit on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. She happened to be a conservative. She was appointed, I think, maybe in the early 2000s or something. But I was a huge fan of her, for one, because she was a Hampton grad. And so for me to see someone who happened to be a conservative and an HBCU grad, I thought it was important not to only hype her up, but I also said to myself that it was a good time to explain why there literally are so few black women on the Supreme Court. This whole trajectory from the lower courts to the Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the launch pad for the Supreme Court. I thought it was important for us to actually talk about that and not just do what we normally do. Well, Republican president not doing this and a Democrat president is doing that. For real, the fact is that Republicans and Democrats alike have not done well when it comes to appointing black women to the Court of Appeals. And so I thought it was good to actually have a conversation to at least unpack that beyond the trending hashtags.
Right. All right. So many of your white conservative colleagues have been aggressive in their opposition to Biden picking a black woman. Let's talk about Mississippi Senator Roger Wicker called the idea affirmative racial discrimination. And then Ted Cruz says it's an insult to black women, which I strongly disagree with. But I want to know from you, how as a black man from Mississippi do you stomach being a part of the GOP that thinks this way?
Well, I've actually, and as you said, yeah, I'm actually from Mississippi, but I began to actually look at race and even politics a bit differently after I moved here to Washington, D.C. Because as liberal and progressive as a place of Washington, D.C. is, if you look across our government and the institutions here where black people are not really represented in these higher executive positions, I started to actually look at race in a different way. So as far as the comments from Senator Wicker and the comments from Senator Cruz, it's unfortunate, but this is one of the things that I talk to members of my party about. It's in messaging. And sometimes, many times, you don't actually have to say anything at all. You can just shut up. But, people don't do that. But that's why I'm here to kind of guide them through it, because in many of these instances, they're saying these things to be provocative, but it comes across as racist. And so they get called out for it. And I always advise candidates, clients that, this is not something that you should do. Some things are just better left unsaid.
Right. You're reminding me of the old Republican Party that many Democrats miss. And you once were a Democrat, and in 2016, you became a Republican. Tell us why you decided to change parties.
Well, first of all, I can say so as long as I've been doing media, which isn't that long, I've never had any person from a black media outlet ask me that question. So thank you for actually asking that question. But I actually started to look at race and politics really differently when I was supporting Barack Obama in 2008. So let it be known, I was the founder, CEO, vice president of Obama Nation. There was nothing you couldn't tell me about that man. And I saw so much in him, and I began to realize, some of the things that I consider, racist, like the comments that some of our white allies were saying, like Joe Biden, and when he said clean and articulate, I was like, whoa, you say that about black people now? But then you had the late Senator Harry Reid, who commented on Barack Obama being a light-skinned Negro who didn't speak in a black dialect unless he had to. So the things that I thought that used to be racist, it kind of changed, but I still went hard and supported Barack Obama twice. But when I started to realize that many of the expectations that I had of Barack Obama as a black president were completely unfair. And most of the things that affect me in my real life happens at the local level.
Right.
That's when I started to make the shift. And the ultimate thing was the nomination of Hillary Clinton. I was out of there. I voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary, but I said that if the Democratic Party nominates Hillary, of the 94 crime bill, super predator Hillary, I said if they did that, I am out of here. And so that's exactly what happened. I started as a Jeb Bush supporter and ended up voting for Donald Trump.
Right. Well, we need more Republicans like you in office, so I'm glad that you're there. Thank you for joining us today, and happy Black History Month.
Thank you for having me.
The Canadian chapter of the Black Lives Matter Global Foundation just bought a $6 million home in Toronto. The purchase is being criticized by Canadian BLM activists. The Canadian branch of the movement operates independently of the U.S. parent organization. Janaea Khan, wife of former BLM organizer Patrice Khan Cullors, acquired the home for what she says will be art and activism space. Khan Cullors has drawn scrutiny before for allegedly using $3 million of the group's money to buy homes in California and Georgia. She denies those claims. It is never a good feeling being a Black person, knowing that there is still so much work that needs to be done on behalf of Black people, especially by the co-founder of an organization that is supposed to be fighting for Black people. And this is not to shame BLM. This is not to shame a Black woman, bring a Black woman down, but it just doesn't feel good knowing that she's, lavishly spending funds here when I'm sure there's money in BLM
I don't think
that could be still allocated
I don't
for
think
Black
that she's
people.
lavishly spending funds. Black Lives Matter, less than 10% of their administration fees went to employees, right? So you're talking about 10% of maybe $30 million. So let's just be clear. Most nonprofit organizations, 90% of their administration fees are to their employees, and the little bit goes to what that organization represents. I think that Black Lives Matter is getting a bad rap, and I think that another thing, last point, is that people think that activists are supposed to be poor, and that's just not the case.
All right. Well, some Denver police say DNA evidence helped them link a dead man to the murders of 4 women that date back to 1978. DNA and genealogical data are being accredited with linking Joe Michael Irvin to the stabbing deaths of the 2 women, including that one of a female officer who tried to arrest him. Irvin committed suicide in a suburban Denver jail in 1981 while he was under investigation for another slaying. The DNA evidence was confirmed in 2018. The genetic evidence identified a relative of Irvin's who lived in Texas. The dead man's body was exhumed last year, and police were able to determine it was the same evidence left at the crime scenes.
A small Alabama town. It doesn't have any traffic lights, but it's caught up in a traffic ticket controversy that's forced the chief of police to resign. Brookside, Alabama, it's only got about 1,200 people for its population, yet traffic fines make up half of the town's $1.2 million budget. Residents in the city have complained about the excessive ticketing in a town with just a handful of 2-lane roads. Local community activists, they brought the issue to state officials, and they say drivers that are Black are targeted disproportionately in a town that's only about 20% African American.
Police body cam footage of a man killed by Nashville police on a highway has led to the suspension of one of the cops. Brian Murphy was one of 9 officers who opened fire on Landon Eastep. Investigators say Eastep was carrying a box cutter. Murphy fired the last 2 shots from a rifle. 5 other cops were placed on administrative leave. The video shows Eastep out of range of any of the cops. He is shot seconds after pointing the box cutter at officers. The incident started when police saw Eastep sitting on a highway guardrail.